You are listening to the War on the Rocks podcast on strategy, defense, and foreign affairs. My name's Ryan Evans, and in this episode I sat down with Schuyler Moore, the Chief Technology Officer of U.S. Central Command. Listen to this episode about how CENTCOM is planning to deter the next war, or win it if necessary, through the application of exciting technology. So Schuyler, how did you get here? How did you get to this role? You've had a pretty interesting career.
I have had quite a circuitous route. So I think that the constant has been circling the issue of tech and national security just from different perspectives. I started in the private sector and really went from there. So started by consulting both defense primes and tech startups on how they could approach this as a market, but then went into Office of Secretary of Defense, looking at the Defense and Innovation Board's S&T portfolio, which obviously had a heavy tech engagement portion of it, and then went to Congress, writing tech legislation, thinking about it from a legislative perspective, and then more recently went to Task Force 59, where that was really operations focused, out in theater, thinking about the ways that these technologies could be used in practical application, and now in my current role as Chief Technology Officer for CENTCOM.
It's quite a lot. Industry, executive branch, legislative branch, military service, and now you're in this position as a civilian.
That is correct.
Talk to us more about your industry position and how that shaped how you view the relationship between technology, national security, and innovation.
I think it was very helpful to start with industry because it gave me a business perspective on tech and national security that I think is sometimes difficult to find or grasp once you're in government. So really was helping either defense primes think about how to start more emerging tech-focused business arms, or looking at tech startups who are trying to enter and really thinking about what their incentive structure was. And the reason that's so important now is because we as DoD need to be a good customer. Of course, it is just as important for industry to reach out to us and to play fair with us. But in the same way, we have to understand that we are just a drop in the bucket for the tech sector. So much of commercial technology has military applications, but really is emerging out of a much bigger market. And so we have to understand and play and understand the incentives coming out of commercial sector.
I want to return to that later because it's a really important point, but through the context of your current job. But so you're an officer in the Navy Reserves, is that correct?
That is correct.
And what's your career field there?
I am an intel officer.
And how'd you end up on Task Force 59? And also tell us what Task Force 59 is. You have to be a special nerd or a practitioner to understand what that is. I think it's even specialized among the specialized.
Special nerd. That is the best way of putting it. So Task Force 59, as a quick overview, is the Navy's 5th Fleet, so focused on the Middle East branch and task force that is focused on unmanned and AI integration into fleet operations. They are out in Bahrain, really working in theater to see whether hardware and software works on the problems that they have there. And the way I got out there was that obviously I was focused on these types of technologies, whether it was robotics or AI, in my various jobs. But I happened to come across the Commodore of that task force, Commodore Michael Brasser, while I was on the Hill. And we just had an early conversation about whether or not I would support him as a reservist on the weekends. And then during that conversation, he said, well, we actually have a need for someone to come out physically to Bahrain. And for me, that had always been a gap in my perspective of having a closer look at the user needs and the user environment. And that was the perfect opportunity to educate myself and make myself better at my job. So I jumped at it.
And what was that experience like for you?
It was fascinating. I think it was one of the most important experiences that I've had, and it shaped the way that I think about my current job because it became so abundantly clear to me that any tech integration requires early and aggressive user integration of their perspective, of their feedback, of their experience in the field, because you could create the most exquisite technology that a user or an operator will simply never actually be able to deploy in the field because you've just never thought about the context in which they're using it. A perfect example of this is a wonderful tech company that we worked with who gave us a piece of kit, and we were very, very excited to get it out on the water. And just before we pushed it out, our director of operations turned to industry and asked, "It's waterproof, right?" He was half kidding. And it turned out that it in fact was not. As a Navy customer.
And he was sitting there about to let his kit be pushed into the water, knowing it wasn't waterproof?
Had not, to be fair, it was strapped onto the back of a boat, but really, you have to assume that if you're operating in that context, you should be thinking about that. And so that's a perfect example of something that could have been solved so much earlier. And it's such a silly, small thing, but it really is those quote unquote silly, small things that end up being the biggest friction points.
So tell us, what's the coolest thing that Task Force 59 did during your time there that you can at least talk about in public, obviously?
I mean, the wonderful part of Task Force 59 is that nearly everything they do is unclassified. They're working with commercial technologies, and so inherently everything they do is out in the open. I mean, gosh, there were so many fascinating pieces ranging from the types of unmanned systems that we had. We had some fast intercept boats that can go blistering 80 plus knots on the water, pull a number of Gs that other vessels simply could never, especially if you had a human, unless you wanted to actively launch somebody out of a boat. And then on the flip side, we really had some interesting experiences with AI. And the lesson again for us was it's so important to test those type of software-based capabilities in theater because we were using imagery, we were using data that was from in theater so that you could teach an algorithm what does a type of boat that typically sails around the Arabian Peninsula look like? Because how is an algorithm supposed to know to look for, say, a dhow carrying weapons across the Arabian Gulf if it's never seen a dhow before? It requires training on data that is from the region itself, and that was an incredibly valuable lesson for us.
How did you end up then from there to Chief Technology Officer of CENTCOM? I believe that's the first time such position has existed at a Geographic Combatant Command.
That is correct. So I was at Task Force 59. I was learning a lot, really enjoying the experience. I had the chance to brief General Kurilla, who newly joined as the commander of CENTCOM early last year. And so we briefed him a couple of times on the work that we were doing. General Kurilla is one of the most data literate and comfortable leaders that I have ever experienced in my entire career in or out of government. His curiosity about the topic, his willingness to really dig into the weeds to understand the tech behind what he is working with is really beyond what I have experienced from other leadership. And so that meant that he was very interested in what Task Force 59 was doing, very supportive once he learned more about us, and then pushed us even further to really ensure that we were pushing capability at the speed that would benefit the command. And then as we went along and he was talking about the broader vision for the combatant command, I really saw it as an opportunity to really elevate what Task Force 59 had done and to expand the mechanisms that we'd found particularly effective. And so once he understood the Task Force 59 model and was driving it forward, he was already expanding his own vision for innovation and tech adoption across the command. And so he stood up this position for Chief Technology Officer, and I was fortunate enough to get an interview and be selected for that. And as soon as I was hired, he also drove the other components to stand up their own task forces, which are now in effect. So you have Task Force 39 for 3rd Army, which is ARCENT, Task Force 59, of course, for the Navy, and then Task Force 99 for 9th Air Force, or AFCENT. And we really think that it's so important to have these organizations and individuals that are focused on it. This is my full-time job. This is all I do. And it means that we really can put a focus on this that might otherwise be lost if someone was doing it as a collateral.
Hi, this is Ryan. I'm taking a break from the episode to tell you about some exciting new features lined up for our members in 2023. From Mid-Afternoon Map, providing a cartographic perspective on current events, geopolitics, and history, to the Russia contingency with Michael Kaufman, to a new members-only app, and much more. If you're not already a member, you can actually fix that right now by going to warntherocks.com/membership. It's priced very reasonably, and the prices will go up again later this year, so lock in the price now. You've run and worked in organizations that, of course, use technology, create technology, field technology, but you yourself don't have a technology background. Like, you're not a coder. You're not you don't create software or build robots in your spare time. So how do you end up as CTO?
I mean, I think that the particular challenge of tech adoption in the department is so beyond just technical that it requires other perspectives that I hope I can bring to this position. I would offer a smaller percentage of a technical problem than it is a policy problem, than it is a bureaucracy managing problem, than it is an acquisition problem. And all of those are topics that I have depth and experience on. And so I think that that is the value of what I'm able to bring. Now, what it requires is that I be very mindful of explaining to folks what my technical barriers are when I'm walking up to the line of my technical knowledge about something. But it's also a really wonderful experience to me because I'm constantly able to learn from the wonderful technical folks that we have both at the command and outside. But I think it's a good lesson for all of us where everyone brings expertise in some area to this field of tech adoption, whether it's technical, whether it's policy, whether it's operational, but everyone has to check themselves at the door and be humble about the fact that nobody has the answer to all of this. This is complex in a way that no other industry experiences, and we therefore have to be able to ask hard questions to really flip every rock and say, how do we go about this? Because none of us has just on our own the right answer.
To what extent are you involved in current ops versus future plans versus working with companies to field new technology, or is it all of it?
A bit of a mix, less so the last one of working directly with companies, because really, I mean, the intent is that we're a combatant command. We have a mission that we are meeting every single day. And so the interest for us is technology that is mature right now and that's ready right now. And so the timeline that I usually give is if tech is ready to give to someone and put in the field in the next 6 months, then we're interested. And if it's really, really exquisite technology, then we'll wait 12 months. But anything outside of that, there's already a really robust community in the department who's handling that type of technology. And so it would be duplicative for us to do that. But inside of that 12 months is really a sweet spot that we're trying to get.
Who are your closest, aside from the big boss himself, who are your closest collaborators, the CENTCOM leadership level?
I mean, the reality, the way that we view this is that both tech adoption and innovation is not exclusive to any one directorate, any one individual. It actually can't be if it's going to be successfully adopted. It is everybody's responsibility. I mean, the folks that I work with particularly are the J2, the Intel shop, of course, J3, the operations shop, J6 is comms, J8 in the resource. But the reality, I believe that to do my job effectively, it requires that almost, if not all of my projects are done in partnership with other joint directorates. I should not be running projects alone because that means that I'm not doing a good job of integrating it into the entire command structure.
How is artificial intelligence being used in CENTCOM operations today?
So what I love about it is that we can finally start being really specific about the ways that we use artificial intelligence. I think for so many years, this has been used as sort of this far away floating cloud of an idea. And the reality is that we have some really specific applications. Computer vision is the most obvious one. I think that everybody knows the work that's been done across the department for imagery of all types. And we absolutely are benefiting from that, both in the maritime, in the air, and the ground space. And then we're also using it for anomalous behavior detection. And so that Task Force 5.9 was really focused on let me think about what the pattern of life is in a certain area. So if you look at the water around the Arabian Peninsula, help me understand what traffic of a normal vessel would look like, and then help me identify when something falls outside of that and means that I should probably take a closer look. And I would offer that this problem is not unique to CENTCOM at all. It is something that all of us share. So if you think about, say, the water around the Arabian Peninsula, we have limited manned assets that can go and interdict. And so having something like an anomalous behavior algorithm to point to us the threats we need to go to is very important. If you then pivot to somewhere like the Pacific, they may have more traditional assets, but they still have a density problem of just a massive maritime geography to cover. And so that anomalous behavior detection is relevant to all of us, regardless of geography.
Do you think it's fair to say that CENTCOM commander, your boss, is interested in making particularly bold and innovative moves, given the fact that, let's just call it what it is everyone's focused on EUCOM and Indo-PACOM right now. CENTCOM, starting arguably at the latest last summer or the summer before last, has taken a back seat. Does this inform the way that you and your boss and your teammates are approaching innovation?
I'd argue that General Curlett, regardless of the context, would be an innovator. It's just in his DNA. He would be driving for change. He would be driving for ways to do things better, regardless of what the context was. Certainly, necessity is the mother of invention for us, where we have very explicit needs. So we are a very active region. We are a problem-rich region. We have a lot of we have a lot of threats and missions that we're trying to meet every day. And on top of it, we agree that strategic competition is the way to go, and we want to make sure that we support that. That doesn't mean that we have the same mission that we need to meet every day. And so as traditional assets are shifted to other regions, it means that we have to be creative about the ways that we are continuing to meet the mission. And so for us, that means thinking about creative ways of using unmanned systems, thinking about creative ways of using AI so that we can be more precise in the way that we use our limited assets.
In terms of the issues in your portfolio, which are vast, it's actually kind of daunting to think about, but to what extent are you collaborating with the other geographic combatant commands? Are there any similar positions in any of the others? To my knowledge, there's not yet.
So for chief technology officers specifically, there aren't across the geographic combatant commands. There are chief data officers, and so we absolutely make sure that we're synced up with them. And again, what we're trying to do at CENTCOM is be the pathfinder in many ways for the department, where we have the environment, we have multiple opportunities a day to test things against live threats, and we have abilities to work through problems that everybody shares. I mean, some of these problems are so distinctly unconnected to a region, like data sharing and data fusion and the policy issues across both of those that the entire department shares, whether or not you're at a combatant command or not. And so we are figuring out the ways to go about that, but it's tied to very specific bounded problem sets that makes it a little bit easier to get our hands around, whereas sometimes I think it might be more difficult to say, how do we solve data fusion for the entire department?
If I'm listening to this show and I'm running a small business with innovative technology that wants to get it into the field with CENTCOM, what do you want them to hear? What message do you want them to take home with them and to their employees?
I want you to first ask your question of, is your technology mature enough where we're actually the right customer? That's the first of, when I hit the on button, is it actually going to turn on? Have you solved the physics or the technical maturity issues related to that? But then after that, if the answer is yes, I would ask that you reach out to a number of fronts. We have our task forces stood up across the Army, Navy, and Air Force. So that's Task Force 39, 59, and 99. And they are actively looking for tech every single day. So I would strongly recommend reaching out to them. If it's something where there's relevance across all three, I would recommend reaching out to me. I also would recommend the number of really fantastic organizations and like the Defense Innovation Unit that can help with those companies who maybe haven't worked with the department before and are trying to navigate it. They've been phenomenal partners for us in getting folks in the door.
This one's admittedly more speculative, but what do you think, just speaking for yourself as a student of war, a practitioner, a military practitioner, not speaking for the command, what lessons do you think we should and shouldn't be taking from Ukraine on the future of warfare? Not specific to Europe, but just specific to how the U.S. military should operate. And I know that in some ways it's too early to tell, but what are your initial thoughts on this?
Oh, it's a great question. There are so many, and we are watching it so closely and learning so much. The lessons of what we can do, I think we're learning the art of the possible of how quickly you can get tech out into the field and how effective it is to get it into the field, into the hands of the people who are using it, and just let it go and let it see how it works, iterate, put it back in, see how it works, iterate, put it back in, and just those incremental increases in capability and how important it is to do that rather than just waiting, holding on to something until you think it's at the perfect state before you hand it over to the user. My takeaway from it is really the model of having a research and development community that sort of lofts technology over a wall to the user without a lot of interface is just, it is both impractical and then once the shooting starts, impossible. You have to have that user feedback. And I think Ukraine is a really good example of how that can be particularly effective, of just set expectations. You're going to give something, whether hardware or software, that may or may not work perfectly that first time, but the expectation is to iterate. The expectation is not that it works perfectly off the bat. Are there technologies that are maybe more front of mind for you than they were before the war, just by watching how this war has played out? Two immediately come to mind. Counter UAS is going to be the most obvious one. It's something that would have been at the front of my mind anyways, because in our region, that is a constant threat. But the reality is that you're seeing the way that regional problems rapidly become global problems with Ukraine. Those are Iranian drones that are flying over Ukraine. Though that is what we are the majority of the risk that we're seeing there. And so for us, counter UAS was always front of mind, but it is particularly front of mind now as we're watching what the risk can be if it is deployed at the volume that it is right now. And then the second one really is, again, the anomalous behavior detection that we're starting to get at with folks like Task Force 59 has such potential for us because it cuts down on the time that some poor operator is having to stare at a screen and think which of these thousands of contacts is important and I'm supposed to look at. It's not that AI is going to replace us. It's not that AI is going to become the magic intel operator that solves all your problem. It's that it's going to augment you and help you and tip and cue you to do your job better. Thanks for joining the show, Schuyler. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening to this episode of the War on the Rocks podcast. Don't forget to check out our membership program at warontherocks.com/membership. Stay safe and stay healthy.